Donald Trump has ignited one of the most severe internal political crises of his career after unleashing an extraordinary meltdown on Truth Social, an outburst so intense and aggressive that members of his own Republican Party are now publicly calling for his resignation, marking a dramatic and unprecedented moment in modern American politics. What triggered this explosion was not a scandal, not an impeachment, not an investigation by Democrats, but a routine House Budget Committee hearing held on December 3rd, a standard annual proceeding where lawmakers question federal spending priorities. For the upcoming fiscal year, Republican members of the committee, many of whom have long supported Trump and consistently backed his agenda, asked basic procedural questions about the numbers in Trump's proposed budget, seeking clarification on how specific cuts would affect their districts, industries, and constituents. Among them was Representative Tom Cole of Oklahoma, a senior Republican, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and a longtime Trump ally, who asked a straightforward and reasonable question about proposed reductions in agricultural subsidies and the potential impact on rural communities, a concern entirely consistent with his role and responsibility as a lawmaker, representing farming districts. By all normal standards of governance, this was legislative oversight functioning exactly as the Constitution intended. Yet Trump reportedly watched the hearing live and interpreted Cole's question not as a policy inquiry but as personal disloyalty, betrayal, and an attack from someone he believed should demonstrate unquestioning allegiance. Within 30 minutes, Trump began posting on Truth Social, and what followed was a cascade of increasingly hostile, erratic, and inflammatory messages that quickly spiraled far beyond political criticism. The first post attacked Cole directly, labeling him a weak Rhino and accusing him of never truly supporting the MAGA agenda, followed by additional posts that escalated in tone and intensity. By the end of the day, Trump had published at least 17 separate attacks, each more aggressive than the last, transforming a routine budget hearing into a full-scale political and constitutional crisis. According to reporting from CBS News and CNN, Trump's language moved rapidly from insults to accusations of corruption, branding Cole a traitor, suggesting without evidence that he was taking bribes from special interests, and demanding his removal from Congress, before expanding his attacks to include other Republican lawmakers who had dared to ask questions during the hearing. The most alarming posts came later that evening, when Trump declared that members of Congress who question him are enemies of the American people and warned that they need to be dealt with, adding phrases such as "patriots know what to do," language that legal experts immediately flagged as potentially inciting violence against sitting members of Congress. This was not ordinary political rhetoric or hyperbole. It was a former and potentially future president appearing to threaten legislators for performing their constitutional duties, a development that sent shockwaves through Capitol Hill and exposed a reality many Republicans had been reluctant to confront. Trump is unable to tolerate even mild scrutiny from his own party. When a committee chairman cannot ask a basic budget question without triggering hours of online rage filled with veiled threats, it raises profound concerns about temperament, stability, and fitness for office. The reaction from Republican lawmakers was swift and extraordinary. The situation escalated further when Trump posted office phone numbers of targeted lawmakers and encouraged supporters to let them know what real Americans think, leading to hundreds of threatening calls within hours, including death threats, reports of staff being told lawmakers should be hanged or shot, and a surge in security concerns that required Capitol Police intervention. Republican leadership found itself trapped between two impossible choices: defend their members and condemn Trump, risking political retaliation and primary challenges, or remain silent and normalize threats against Congress, effectively abandoning constitutional oversight. Legal analysts, including former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, warned that threatening federal officials to influence their actions may violate federal law, specifically statutes prohibiting intimidation of government officials. While former FBI General Counsel Andrew Weissman emphasized the direct pattern between Trump's words and real-world actions, pointing to January 6 as a clear precedent. Even conservative legal scholars who had previously defended Trump expressed alarm, acknowledging that a president cannot use his platform to intimidate Congress without endangering the constitutional order. The broader implications are profound and deeply troubling. If members of Congress fear death threats for asking questions, democratic governance cannot function. According to Politico, some Republican lawmakers are privately reconsidering whether holding hearings or asking tough questions is worth the risk to their families. a chilling sign of rule by intimidation rather than rule of law. The Republican Party itself is increasingly fractured between a MAGA base that views any criticism of Trump as betrayal and traditional conservatives who believe in separation of powers and institutional integrity. Meanwhile, Democrats observe this internal conflict with concern for democratic norms and recognition of its political consequences, as Republicans themselves make the case against Trump's leadership. Trump's response to criticism only deepened the crisis when he doubled down on December 5th, attacking senators who called for his resignation, threatening primary challenges, and reinforcing the pattern of escalation rather than de-escalation. Ultimately, this episode is not merely about another Trump outburst. It is about whether Congress can remain an independent, co-equal branch of government when faced with presidential intimidation and mobilized political violence. When lawmakers from a president's own party conclude that his behavior threatens democratic governance and publicly call for resignation, it signals a fundamental rupture in American politics. The question now confronting the nation is whether constitutional checks and balances can withstand a leader who equates oversight with betrayal and loyalty with obedience, or whether intimidation and fear will replace accountability, leaving the future of congressional independence and democratic rule in unprecedented jeopardy. Donald Trump's latest eruption on Truth Social has triggered what many political analysts are calling one of the most dangerous internal crises in modern American governance, not because it involved foreign interference, impeachment proceedings, or opposition party attacks, but because it revealed in stark, undeniable terms how fragile the relationship has become between a president and the constitutional system meant to restrain executive power, as well as how quickly political loyalty has replaced institutional responsibility within large segments of American politics. The episode began on December 3rd during what was supposed to be a routine House Budget Committee hearing, a standard and largely procedural event that takes place every year as members of Congress examine federal spending, priorities for the upcoming fiscal cycle, review proposed cuts and allocations, and ask questions intended to clarify how executive branch decisions will affect their constituents. These hearings are not confrontational by design. They are an essential part of legislative oversight, a core constitutional responsibility granted to Congress to ensure that taxpayer money is allocated responsibly and that executive proposals are subject to scrutiny, debate, and transparency. On this particular day, Republican lawmakers, many of whom have consistently supported Trump's agenda, voted with him on key legislation and defended him through impeachment trials and political scandals, were simply doing their jobs. They asked questions about numbers, impacts, and priorities, particularly how proposed budget reductions might affect rural districts, agriculture, infrastructure, and local economies. Among those lawmakers was Representative Tom Cole of Oklahoma, a veteran Republican, chairman of the powerful Appropriations Committee, and a long-established Trump ally whose record shows repeated support for Trump-backed initiatives. Cole posed a straightforward question regarding proposed cuts to agricultural subsidies and their potential consequences for farming communities, an inquiry entirely consistent with his role as a representative of a largely rural state and as a senior figure responsible for overseeing federal spending by any normal measure of democratic governance. This exchange should have passed unnoticed outside policy circles, yet it became the spark for an extraordinary and alarming political meltdown. According to multiple reports, Trump watched the hearing live and immediately interpreted Cole's question not as legislative oversight but as a personal betrayal, a sign of disloyalty, and an attack from someone he believed should demonstrate unquestioning allegiance rather than independent judgment. This inability to distinguish between institutional responsibility and personal loyalty has long been a defining feature of Trump's political behavior. But in this instance, the consequences were more severe and more public than ever before. Within approximately 30 minutes of Cole's remarks, Trump began posting on Truth Social, launching a barrage of messages that escalated rapidly in tone, content, and intensity. His first post accused Cole of being a weak rhino, suggesting he had never truly supported the MAGA movement, an assertion contradicted by Cole's voting record and public statements. The post did not stop there. One message followed another, each more aggressive than the last, until by the end of the day Trump had published at least 17 separate attacks directed not only at Cole but at other Republican lawmakers who had participated in the hearing. What began as political criticism quickly morphed into something far more troubling. According to reporting from CBS News and CNN, Trump accused Cole of being a traitor, implied without evidence that he was accepting bribes from special interests, called for his removal from Congress, and extended similar accusations to other Republicans who had asked questions during the hearing. The language Trump used went beyond insults or rhetorical exaggeration and entered territory that legal experts immediately recognized as dangerous. In several posts, Trump declared that lawmakers who questioned him were enemies of the American people and warned that they need to be dealt with, adding phrases such as "patriots know what to do," wording that, while not explicitly instructing violence, strongly suggested approval of punitive action against named individuals. Given Trump's history, his influence over millions of supporters, and the violent consequences that have followed similar rhetoric in the past, including the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, these statements triggered immediate alarm across Washington. This was not merely another instance of Trump venting frustration online. It was a former and potentially future president appearing to threaten sitting members of Congress for fulfilling their constitutional duties, a scenario that strikes at the very foundation of the separation of powers. The reaction on Capitol Hill was swift, anxious, and unprecedented. Republican lawmakers who had previously defended Trump, minimized his outbursts, or remained silent in the face of controversy now found themselves confronting a situation in which their colleagues were being targeted, named, and exposed to real-world danger. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska issued a statement on December 4 describing Trump's behavior as unacceptable and calling for serious discussions about whether he should continue in office. A notable escalation given her prior criticisms, but still a rare public rebuke from within Trump's own party. Even more striking was the response from Senator Mitt Romney, who publicly stated that Trump's actions were dangerous, potentially criminal, and incompatible with democratic governance, going so far as to say that resignation was necessary for the good of the country. Romney's remarks carried particular weight. Because he had often been portrayed as a dissenting voice within the party rather than a bellwether. Yet his words reflected a broader and growing unease among Republicans who privately acknowledged that something fundamental had shifted. This episode forced the Republican Party to confront a reality it had long attempted to avoid. Trump cannot tolerate even mild procedural scrutiny from his own allies without responding with rage, retaliation, and threats. When a senior committee chairman cannot ask a basic budget question without provoking hours of public attacks that include veiled threats, accusations of treason, and incitement-like language, it raises profound questions about leadership, temperament, and the viability of constitutional governance under such conditions. This was not an isolated incident, but rather the latest manifestation of a long-established pattern in Trump's political career, one defined by the demand for absolute loyalty and the punishment of anyone who prioritizes institutional duty over personal allegiance. Mitch McConnell, once one of Trump's most effective allies who shepherded judicial nominations, blocked Democratic legislation, and defended Trump during impeachment proceedings, became a target the moment he acknowledged Joe Biden's 2020 election victory and refused to endorse unfounded claims of widespread fraud. Trump responded by mocking McConnell's appearance, undermining his leadership, and encouraging challenges against his allies, demonstrating that years of loyalty meant nothing when constitutional responsibility intervened. Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, a reliably conservative lawmaker, faced Trump's wrath after stating the simple and verifiable truth that the 2020 election was legitimate, prompting Trump to insult him and question his political legitimacy. Liz Cheney, who voted with Trump over 90% of the time and held a senior leadership position in the House, saw her career systematically dismantled after she voted to impeach Trump following January 6 and joined the committee investigating the attack. Her offense being not ideological opposition, but adherence to constitutional accountability. The situation escalated further when Trump posted the office phone numbers of several targeted lawmakers and encouraged supporters to contact them, framing the action as letting officials hear what real Americans think. Within hours, congressional offices reported hundreds of threatening calls, including death threats, with staff members describing callers who said lawmakers should be hanged for treason, shot, or otherwise harmed. The volume and severity of these threats forced Capitol Police to increase security for multiple members of Congress, transforming Trump's online rhetoric into a tangible security crisis. Republican leadership found itself trapped in an extraordinary bind. On one hand, condemning Trump risked political retaliation, loss of endorsements, and primary challenges in a party where Trump's influence remains powerful. On the other hand, remaining silent meant normalizing threats against elected officials and effectively abandoning the constitutional role of Congress as a co-equal branch of government. Legal analysts warned that Trump's behavior may have crossed into criminal territory. Former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance explained that threatening federal officials to influence their official actions can violate federal law, noting that while the First Amendment protects criticism, it does not PR.